Shalom Aleichem, Mishpachim. I am coming to you with a reading from Likkutei Sichos in Vayikra, or the Torah portion of Vayikra. So this is a Torah insight by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And I always have a good time reading these. They are so insightful, so packed, full of Torah depth. So let us begin. All right. Here we go. Vayikra. Parshat Vayikra, the Parsha dealing with sacrifices, begins, Adam ki yakriv mikem, if any man of you will offer a korban, offering, which is sacrifice, unto God. This verse presents a difficulty. If we take the verse in its plain sense, the word mikem, meaning of you, qualifies Adam, man, thus reading, if any man of you. But Scripture should then have placed the words in that order, Adam mikem ki yakriv. Why is the word mikem placed later, after ki yakriv? Chassidut interprets this verse to signify and explain the spiritual meaning of sacrifices in terms of the avodah, the service, the divine service of man's soul. For our sages note on the verse, and they shall make me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell among them. It does not say, and I shall dwell in it, in the sanctuary, but among them, in them, which means within every single individual of Israel. Thus it follows that all the service of the physical Mishkan and Mikdash apply equally on the spiritual level, that is, to the spiritual sanctuary inherent in every Jew. If this applies to all forms of service, then surely also to the service of sacrifices. For even in the material sanctuary, when physical animals were offered as sacrifices, the ultimate purpose was a spiritual service, a spiritual avodah. That is, why the offering of sacrifices required the service of the Kohanim, the priests, and the chanting and songs of the Levites, both of which were activities of a purely spiritual nature. Thus it is stated in the Zohar that the service of the Kohanim was in silence, with devotion of the heart, signifying hamshacha, drawing forth from above, and the service of the Levites was with song and music, signifying hala'ah, sublimation, elevating from below upwards. It is then clear that even the offering of sacrifices in the sanctuary was essentially a spiritual avodah, service. How much more so is this the case with the service of sacrifices that relates to every individual? The Alter Rebbe explains the above verse as follows. Adam ki yakriv, if a man desires to draw close to divinity, for the word korban implies a drawing close of one's faculties and senses. Then, mikem, korban la Hashem, you must offer of yourself. This principle involves two details. A, mikem signifies the offering of the nefesh elokit, the divine soul in man, and B, the further words in the text of the animals, signifying the animal in man's heart. The nefesh, haba chamit, the animal soul. Scripture thus continues, of the herd and of the flock, which relates to the specific levels of the animal soul as explained in Chassidut. The ultimate purpose for man is not an avodah relating to the divine soul for its sake. It is rather to achieve a birur, a refinement of the animal soul. This is indicated in the text itself. The word mikem, of you, is followed by korban la havaya, an offering to God. Also, after enumerating the details from the animals, from the herd, and from the flock, Scripture concludes, for his acceptance, lifnei havaya, before God. The word lifnei indicates a level transcending that of havaya. For the refinement of the animal soul reaches supreme levels, as Scripture states, there is much increase by the strength of the ox. An offering of mikem reaches but to the level of havaya. To be sure, the offering of mikem reaches beyond the level of Elohim, the divine name whose numerical equivalent is the same as of the word hateva, nature, thus signifying the aspect of divinity concealed within nature, namely to Havaya, as the Zohar states in comment on the verse, "He who sacrifices unto Elohim shall be doomed." Nonetheless, this ascent does not compare to that which is effected by a refinement of the body and the animal soul. The latter reaches much higher, to Lifnei Havaya, that is, altogether beyond Hishtal Shelut, the normative order of the creative process. Thus it is said that when the Sitra Achra is subdued, the glory of the Holy One, blessed be He, is exalted in all worlds, which refers to the divine light which shines in all worlds alike. The procedure of offering an animal on the physical level required first of all an examination of the animal to ascertain that it was whole, free of any defect or blemish, for only then would it be accepted favorably as a sacrifice. The same principle applies to sacrifices on the spiritual level. Before sacrificing the spiritual animal, before offering the animal soul unto God, one must first of all see to it that it is whole, free of any blemish. The beginning of our service, our divine service, therefore requires bedika, examination. One must examine all the corners and niches of his soul, the intellect, the emotive attributes, and especially the three soul garments of thought, speech, and deed, to discover any unbecoming aspects and to correct these. In order for this examination to be truly sincere and not merely like a commandment of men learned by rote, one must realize that it is crucial to his very life. The consciousness that this affects his very life will assure that there will be a proper examination and also the follow-up of implementing any necessary corrections. Self-examination and the appraisal of one's condition is in full consciousness that this is in his own best interest will lead to practical conclusions. Even when noting that at present he is not an actual sinner, he may discover that my sin is ever before me. That is, there may still be sins committed in his early youth, including the period prior to his bar mitzvah, which have remained with him because he has not remedied them fully as yet. There is clear evidence that these sins have not yet been remedied, that he has not yet done proper teshuvah. For if this teshuvah had been as it should be, his avodah, his divine service, would have been much more intense. The realization of having been in a land of drought and the shadow of death should have aroused in him a profound longing and love for godliness, a love so powerful that it would effect his premeditated sins to be transmuted into merits. In reality, however, he sees that he has not reached that level. Moreover, when contemplating his true status without trying to be easy on himself and to fool himself, he senses that in fact he is in the opposite track. His transgressions have not been transmuted into merits, and all are still intact. This is evident from the fact that he is still attracted to sins. For one transgression brings about another transgression. It follows then that his teshuvah is not yet as it should be. The concept of my sin is ever before me sometimes means that relative to one's present improved condition and status, the past teshuvah is insufficient, and there is need for a higher level of teshuvah. In our context, however, it has the literal meaning because he failed to correct himself. His past, therefore, has become a partition interposing between him and his Father in heaven, separating him and preventing him from serving God. When contemplating on all that and realizing the significance of korbanot, sacrifices, he may be troubled by a problem. For korbanot signify drawing one's faculties and senses close to the spiritual fire, to the point of becoming absorbed in it. The principle of the offering ascends to the very mystery of the Ein Sof. Thus he will ask of himself, how can I relate to korbanot? How can I find favorable acceptance as a korban unto God when there is no wholeness in me? In order to provide an answer to this question, my father-in-law, the Rebbe, added the following words to the interpretation of the Alter Rebbe, stated above. Mikem ubachem hadavar talue. This matter depends completely on you yourselves. Regardless of one's present condition and status, regardless of whatever may have happened in the past, it is altogether up to the person himself, mikem, to the point that everyone can say, When will my actions reach the level of the actions of my ancestors, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? With the physical offering of a sacrifice, after confirming that the animal was whole, without blemish, one proceeded with the shechita, slaughter of the animal. The body of the animal remained intact even after shechita, because only the life force has been removed. But then it was offered upon the altar, where the physical substance of the animal was burned in the fire that was used to descend from heaven. With all animal sacrifices, their fats were burned. And in the case of a korban olah, burnt offering, the first offering every day, the whole animal entirely burnt on the altar. The same applies to the spiritual level. After mending the blemishes, there must be shechita, to slaughter the body and animal soul, that is, to remove the engrossment in, the vitality of, material things. The material entity per se remains intact, but without engrossment in it. Man will use physical matter only for additional strength and energy in the service of God. Thus it is said that wine and spices sharpen the mind, and as I did not yet eat the meat of oxen, I did not note the reason. This is the concept that everything should be for the sake of heaven, the obligation of know him in all your ways. On a still deeper level, it means not only to use the material things for holy purposes, but to transform them themselves into a mitzvah and holiness. As for example, the food eaten on Shabbat and festivals, or using physical wool to make tzitzit, and the physical parchment to make tefillin, and so forth. After this, there can be the actual offering. The body and animal soul are absorbed in the divine fire inherent in the soul. Thus it is written, its heat is the heat of a fire, a flame of God, on which our sages comment, as the fire from above. This refers to the soul's love for God, which will absorb the body and animal soul so that the animal soul, too, will love God, as it is said, you shall love God, your God, with all your heart, with all which our sages interpret to mean with both your inclinations. And that is Likkutei Sichos, Lubavitcher Rebbe, on Vayikra, Parsha Vayikra.